29th, 1987. The other day I listened to my original tape, which I refer to as Geschichtes and Bobbie. I was asked to tape a sequel, and I found myself at a loss for a proper title. I finally decided to do what all big businesses have been doing for years. They never change the name of the product, but add the words new and improved to the product. So now I shall refer to my Geschichtes and Bobbie as new and improved, and I hope that you would enjoy some of the Geschichtes. I recently saw an article that stressed the importance of taping family recollections of the elderly and preserving a rich slice of our heritage. So now let's continue our sentimental journey of our priceless past. Mama was the head of the family, and she ruled not with an iron hand or an iron fist, but with a broomstick, which she deftly used to punish us, especially when we sought refuge under the bed. She used to use her hand to inflict punishment, but she soon discovered that hitting the boys was like hitting a stone wall. During the summer, my father would go to South Boston and come home with a load of watermelons and other fruits and vegetables. Saturday night was the busiest time of the week, and people from the surrounding area would come to Arlington Street to shop. Arlington Street in Chelsea was a great big flea market. Of course, it was important that my father buy as much as possible for as little as possible. Seldom did he buy watermelons that were choice. He was an expert in purchasing specks or slightly damaged. After cutting away the speck, we kept our fingers crossed that the watermelon would be red when cut. A piece of red watermelon was worth more than a kielbär. A kielbär lacked the redness of a good melon. When a kielbär was cut, two things happened. First, my father would get a dirty look from my mother, and secondly, surgery was performed on the kielbär with a knife that was scraped on the top of the melon to make it look a little rosier. The lights were dimmed, and just a little, to confuse the purchasers, and the price went down. During the week, as was the custom, peddling with a horse and wagon was common, and peddlers would stop, shout at the top of their lungs the types of wares that were for sale. The people would leave the homes and buy from the peddler as he reached their house. I could hear my father peddling while I was in the school, and the windows were open. At times, I was slightly embarrassed, and I didn't consider that he was earning a living for me and the family. Today, the descendants of these peddlers have become entrepreneurs of the fish industry, and also the descendants of other peddlers have become doctors and lawyers. An integral part of my early years was honesty and respect. My parents never had any problems. with this large family, these important characteristics continue to be a trademark of the family. Today, fish is considered and highly recommended for a healthy body. Boy, oh boy, did we have health. We had enough fish in us to last us all our lives. The only time that we saw a doctor was when he came to our house for the birth of a child. Of course, he made many visits, and I only recall the snowy November day when Evelyn was born. When we did get sick, Mama would use her natural thermometer, which was the palm of her hand, and touch our forehead. The usual medication that was used was X-Lax and castor oil. Besides saving the cost of a doctor's visit, $2, my mother's treatment was very effective. Of course, a broken leg or arm was not part of my mother's medical training, and a hospital visit was important. My mother was calm, polite, and agreeable when negotiating a deal. She was an expert in the art of haggling, and when the final price was reached, my mother would smile and say goodbye to a tired and bewildered person. Today, her talent for arbitration would be in great demand. Like speaking Yiddish, the art of haggling continues to be part of our early and continuing heritage. Haggling is an art, and we were taught by a master, a pro, our mother. The dictionary defines haggling as to argue about terms, price, and so forth. And it also mentioned the words to chop or to cut. Any deal that required a price was always followed by some haggling. The word haggle was a euphemism for the Jewish word medavsach dingen. The art of dingen is part of history. It was practiced during biblical times. Unfortunately, the present generation has lost this great art of haggling. Today, it is referred to as negotiating a price. Some of the real pros in the art of haggling are or were Ben, Shirley, and Helen. Shirley, God bless her, being the oldest, could have taught a course at any fine business college. The course would be called Haggling 1, or How to Eat Somebody's Heart Out. Now, let's talk about the family. Shirley, Ben, and Betty were in their teens while I was growing up. I recall working hard. I recall Ben working hard at the chicken slaughterhouse, and how proud the family was while he attended Harvard. I remember Shirley keeping company with Arthur Gibbs, who she married. I remember Arthur as a man with class, one who would be called in to mediate any family problem. I remember working for Gibbs Brothers on Broadway, Chelsea, and I recall in 1927, while I was in the store, the newsboys were shouting, "Charles Lindbergh crosses the ocean." Holidays, or Yontif, were days of rest for my parents. Mama was a self-educated woman. She spoke several languages, and she read Hebrew and was a fluent letter writer. Many of the letters were written to relatives in Kovno, Russia, along with money and clothing packages. Being Orthodox meant that we would look for a Gentile to light the gas. Years later, the boys would do it themselves. Months before Passover meant winemaking. I remember my brothers and sisters sitting in a circle and putting the concord grapes in several large wine containers. After several months of fermentation, the wine was strained and bottled. Passover was festive, and my mother worked hard for weeks preparing for the holidays. Remember, we did not have modern refrigeration. A large barrel was put into a hole in the basement floor, packed with ice, and the food was stored. Very primitive but effective. I recall each Passover my mother buying large quantities of matzahs and other Passover products. Eggs were purchased by the case. Passover time also meant new shoes. Most of us would go to the Walton shoe factory about a mile or so from the house to be fitted with new shoes. Naturally, my mother would haggle on the price, and after threatening to go elsewhere, a price was reached. My father conducted the Passover services, and he had a very fine voice, and we always concluded the services with traditional songs. I always thought of my father when Ben conducted future Passover services. He sang the songs like my father. Helen, God bless her, went through life being the manager or looking for the manager. She was a take-charge girl. It seems that all parties, plans, picnics, trips had to originate and clear through Helen. At times, she would anger us, but we always loved her. Helen did not believe in standing in any line, whether it was at the movies or on the battlefield of Eileen's basement. Coded signals were used when making long-distance calls. When Eileen's basement had their annual Dollar Day sale, all phones would light up with person-to-person calls for Dolly. The following morning, Eileen's was loaded with dollies, including Dolly Kaplan from Worcester. Dollar Day at Eileen's basement was an event and the inspiration for that great book, The Charge of the Kaplan Brigade. At the proper time, Helen would lead the charge at Eileen's basement. Follow me meant charge. And like a National Football League offensive guard, she would push and weave herself to the front section of the counter. Teresa was in the back of Helen and was following her interference. During one of these memorable charges, Helen was penalized by a hat pin in the rump. She turned and said, who did that? Who will ever forget Helen as a backseat driver? Poor Leo, on many occasions, was forced into following a big truck with a roadway sign in his face. Helen loved to play gin rummy. It seems that I was a special cookie for her and Evelyn. Losing didn't bother me. It was the little smiles and the little remarks that irked me. Who will ever forget Helen with her mellifluous call for Leo in a crowded store? All in the store sought out the source of that call. Trips to the Cape were often, and Cynthia's home was the focal point to meet. We would reserve rooms at the hotels and hope that the weekend weather would be good. Earlier, I mentioned that we had coded words for long-distance calls. If the weather was good, the word was Bobbie, which in Jewish meant swimming. This was the signal to come to the Cape. If the weather was bad, the word was voylikes. The person-to-person call was put through with a request to speak to either Mr. Bobbie or to Mr. Voylikes. I felt sorry for the operator trying to pronounce the proper name. Incidentally, voylikes were heavy boots that were worn in Russia during the winter. Perhaps some of you will remember seeing Fiddler on the Roof. Tevye wore them. Albert was the creator of a new method of banking that is used today by all banks across the country. It is known as branch banking. Albert, in a small way, banked his money throughout the house. There wasn't a carpet or a floor mat that missed his keen scrutiny for a safe depository. Bobbie, the youngest brother, was the quiet one. Bobbie, it seemed, was my mother's favorite. Whenever an appliance, notably the washing machine, required some repairs, Bobbie would be called in to fix it. Bobbie, in his quiet way, was respected by his many friends, and God help anybody that tested his strength. My sister Lilly, as a child, was a very pretty, athletic, and a crackerjack marble shooter. I have tried to recall many of the interesting events of the past, and I'm sure that I have omitted some events, not intentionally, but because I can't recall them all. My parents would have been proud of their family and would have derived much nachas. These tapes are only the beginning. Perhaps when we are gone, others will continue to record the future of the Kaplan family. Finally, I dedicate these tapes to my parents, brothers and sisters, and their wonderful husbands and wives.